Hello everybody, today I want to talk to you about web APIs too, and how we can utilize that to create better applications that allows us to communicate with other applications and be called from front-end technologies without having to go through configurations and whatnot. Web APIs are a very good alternative for WCF services, except in one tiny part, which is that it cannot provide you the net TCP connections, which means that it's not going to be as fast as a net TCP connection if your infrastructure or system architecture allows you to communicate with different services within the same framework. You're probably better off with the WCF. Other than that, I'd go with the web API, specifically if you're using it for programs for web applications or mobile applications that is expected to be communicating a lot through the internet through a web API. And we will talk about, hopefully we'll talk about, some optimizations and what can be done so you don't have your cell phone making too many requests just to get some data. So we'll talk about caching, which is a very, very, very old concept that people have used all the time to minimize, communicating with a remote resource, whether that resource is a database, whether it's a web service, whether it's a WCF service and whatnot, to make sure that your operation is as less of a cost as possible. So let's talk about web API. So I'm going to start our beloved IDE here, the Visual Studio 2013. If you don't have Visual Studio 2013 and if you're a student, just go get your free copy of it. There's a previous video for me talking about how to be a successful software engineer. It tells you exactly how to get the tools that you want from Microsoft. So let's start a new project in here, and let's go to ASP.NET MVC4. Someone would tell me, we're building web APIs. Why are we building an ASP.NET MVC web application? Because actually APIs, application programming interface, is an application that has different mutations. So it could be a mobile application, Facebook applications. It's really up to you. So let's call our API students API. You will notice that I use students a lot. I love students. Learning is a very important thing. So it's an honor to be a student. So let's call it students API, and let's start this guy. So you got a bunch of options, and what we're going to pick up here is the web API. So I'm going to go ahead with that and just click OK. We will go through the CRUD and how can you fully communicate with a web API more efficiently. And of course we have to touch base with the entity framework, because if you're using a web API, either you're doing really expensive calculations that you don't want to call all the time, you don't want to copy that functionality, or, which is most likely what happens with web APIs all the time, there's a database behind it. The good thing about web API 2 is that you get to, when you start a new project, you could start an empty one, and that's okay, or you could just get a sample that shows you what's going on, right? So as soon as you started this project, you already have a bunch of routes, and we'll talk about these routes. These routes are basically just what you put in the link, or what you call from your jQuery application, Node.js and whatnot, in order for you to pull these data to the client side. So you already have a bunch of routes, and these routes are already providing you with the CRUD operation. So you got delete, you got update, you got insert, you got retrieve, you got the whole thing. So let's go ahead and launch this guy just up front and see what happens here. So the application provides you, this is not the intent of a web API. This is just a front end that's friendly, that allows you to modify it later, so your users will be able to know what routes they need to use and what samples they need to use in order for them to use your API more efficiently. That's all. So the routes that we really want to call is API values, And when we call this guy, it brought value 1 and value 2 as XML file. You can send it as a JSON. It's really up to you. Your serialization is completely up to you. It depends on what do you expect your end user, what kind of knowledge and what your end user is expecting out of you, right? So where did that come from? API/values. If you look here, the auto-generated sample on Visual Studio is already leaving you with this comment that says if you call this route, you will get these values, and if you call this route, you'll get these values, and so on and so forth. Alright, that's cool. But I want to make my own routes, right? So where do these routes come from? Let's see where these routes come from. We have two things in here. We have controllers, and these controllers are the guys that hold, you know, all these functionalities. So they talk to models, they use models, and then they talk to routes in order to execute a specific operation. Where are these routes implemented? If you go up here, you have three things in app start. You have web API config and route config, right? The route config just shows the default route, so it doesn't really specify anything. It just says every time you create a controller, I'm going to use that controller name, I'm going to go find an action, and then I'm going to go find an ID, and some of these things are optional. Maybe all of them are optional. So where the API/values is coming from, the API is static. Here it is, it's standing here. But values is dynamic because you already created values. There's already created values controller in here. So you don't really need to go specify specifically that you want values to be in the route. It already understands that. And I'll show you how is that happening. So let's go ahead and try to create. First of all, we just create our own object. So let's go ahead and just create an object in the models. And because we're talking about students, we're just going to call our class student, as we usually do. So we have student, right? Here's our student. Let's give that student some properties. So I'm going to go ahead and say, so this student has an ID. That's a good idea to use GUID. It has a name. That's a string, and it has a age. That's an integer. So alright, you have the student with these three properties, and you want to manipulate that. You want to play with that around. So let's see what we're going to do with this guy. First of all, we want that we built the abstraction of the representation of our data. So you have data that's, you know, represented on an abstract level as a student. You want to control that. You want to control that data. And by controlling that data, I mean taking this data and putting it into different contexts based on what the user really needs. So the user needs to submit stuff, retrieve stuff, and whatnot. Whatever the user needs, this all goes to the controller. And that's a part of the whole, you know, idea of the MVC is the separation of concern. Look up on the internet the solid principles, and you know, you will understand. It looks a little bit weird and, you know, spaghetti at the beginning, but it's really very simple when you understand it. So at the controllers part, I'm just going to go ahead and add a controller. And the controller name, yeah, you guessed it, is students. So it's going to be students controller. And it already offers you a bunch of stuff, right? You can just make it an empty API controller, or it could just help you with putting a API controller with empty read, write actions, even with the entity framework. Right? Let's try this guy. This guy is cool. So what's your model here? You're going to go ahead and say my model is a student. Let's go ahead and find this guy. Students API. Where is our friend that we just created? Is it public? Let's see. It is public. So let's go and try again. Add controller. Controller using the entity framework. I guess we need just to stop being lazy and just go ahead and write our own. And let's see, students. I just want to make it as simple as possible. Let's see. So our guy here is not showing up. You know why, guys? Because we need to rebuild our application. So when I rebuild my application and then I go like this and add the controller again and call it students controller, and then I want it like fully functional with the entity framework and whatnot, so I don't really have to build that, student shows up. Do not forget to build your application. Data context class. Did I make one? Just create one for me. So it'll just go ahead and say students API context. Fine, you know, and then add it. So now it's going to create a controller. They're actually the whole entity framework situation here. So you have get student, you have put student, you have you have post student, everything. It just created everything for you. And I really wanted to create it from scratch, but it would be fun just to see, you know, what this guy actually is capable of. So it created the API context in here, and in the controller part, it created all the methods that you need, right? So let's go ahead and play around with this guy. So it's saying here that it wants to post a student. So in order for us to actually see students, we need to post students first. So let's go ahead and run this guy and see what happens. I assume that, you know, when I just go ahead and say /API/students, it'll just return an empty XML that doesn't have anything in it. Right now it's taking a little bit longer because it's talking to the entity framework, and then the entity framework responded, yes, I created the tables in the database, but there's nothing there. So let's post to this guy. If you look online on some of the samples, people actually take you the whole way into creating a new solution in order for you to see how to post some information. But that's not realistic because people simply just use, you know, a front-end technology like jQuery or Ajax just to communicate with your API. So instead of that, just go and use something called Postman, right? So there's this thing called Postman, and what Postman is, it's just a client that you can have on your Chrome, and Postman allows you actually to communicate with your web API. And I already have my stuff in here. So let's, you know, this is old stuff. This is me trying out, so I won't be embarrassed in my video, and I already did it like a couple of times. So let's try to do that from scratch. So API students, I want to post to this guy. In the post part, in here, it just needs a student. And we know already that our student has bunch of properties that we just need to fill. So I can can I peek in here? Yeah, there it is. So when I peek in here, it just shows, you know, the GUID, the string. So we need just to provide these things. So if I go back to the Postman, and I just go ahead and say, I want to post this data, I have ID, and I need some GUID. Where do I get a GUID? You know, I think the IDE will provide you with a GUID. Just go ahead and create a GUID, and it'll just copy it and just throw that in there. It really pisses me off sometimes, you know, that it has to put some squiggly thing or whatnot, never just a raw data, or maybe I just don't know how to do it. So name in here. So let's post the student name. Let's say this name is Chris Walter, for example. And what is the other property is the age, and I'm going to say this guy's age is 29, like this. So we're making a call here to this guy, right? Let me empty this guy so we get to see all the requests. And I'm going to put a caret in here to catch what's happening as the call is going through my web API. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to send. Whoops, that's not. Hold on. It's actually, I think it's, yeah, I'm right. So it was actually calling the old application that I was trying. So here's our students. This guy's working. Let's post this guy in here. So here's our students. Let's try this guy here. There you go. So now I posted, so it caught into this function. And if you go to that student guy, you will see all the properties in here. The ID, the age, and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and jump straight forward. and it says, hey, I posted this guy for you. So now you have this student have been actually posted through the entity framework right to the database using the web API. Now let's retrieve that student. Let's add a couple of other students, right? So I'm just gonna change something here. I'm just gonna be, quick and dirty. I'm just gonna add stuff in here. So I'm gonna add myself, and I'm 29 already, so I don't need to worry about that. I'm just gonna keep going forward. So I posted this guy. Let's add another one. I'll just say 3 in here. That's really bad. And let's add, for example, let's add Mark Wilson. And let's send this guy as well. So we added all these guys. All right. So we made all these calls. We added all these guys. Awesome. Let's make a GET request. So now I'm pulling all these students that I already posted to the database. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull. Look, these are all the guys that I need. And they're already sorted with the ID, with the name, with the age. All of them are 29. Oh, what a coincidence. So that's the thing, and it's giving you a status 200, right? And you get to do the same thing. So I want to delete one of these guys. So I'm going to go ahead. I want to delete one of these guys. So I'm going to use another functionality in here, and this functionality is delete students. And all it needs really is just the GUID, right? So I'm just going to send that GUID to it. So let's see how is that going to be done. I'm just going to put my breakpoint in here. I'm just going to go ahead and remove all this data. I'm just going to keep that ID. And I want to delete this guy, whoever that guy is. Which you found matches, blah, blah, blah. Let's see, what is our route? All right. So I can just add a parameter. Actually, I don't need to post it this way. I can just add it as a parameter. So I can go ahead here and say ID equals, I wonder if I just didn't add an ID at all. I just add the value. So I'm just going to copy this guy. I'm just going to throw it in here. Doesn't like it. I'm just going to say ID. So ID equals blah blah. And I don't need these guys. And let's try that. Ooh, it hits in. Did it get that ID? Yes, it did. So let's continue. So now what happened, it deleted Mark Wilson. So if I go to the students and pull all these guys, like GET, like this, it deleted Mark Wilson. It just kept these 2 other guys, right? So you got the add, you got the retrieve. Let's retrieve just one student. So I'm just going to go ahead and GET and say /student. I'm just going to say the student ID that I want to retrieve is Chris Walter. So I'm just going to get his GUID. I'm going to throw it in here. Just going to send that. So it pulls only Chris Walter, right? Really cool, huh? The one last thing is to update. So let's try to update. It's put command. And what does the update route wants from us? Post student, put student. What it really wants is that the whole object and the ID of that object and what you really want to update. So let's update Chris Walter. Let's call him Christopher Walter. So I'm going to go ahead and say the ID is this guy. And I'm going to post a student in here. So I'm going to say it's the same ID. The name is going to be Christopher instead of Chris. So it's going to be Christopher Walter. And then the age is going to be 29 as is. Let's see how's that going to work for us. We have put, we have the route, we have everything. Let's try that. Huh, I wonder if it really changed it. Let's see. Get students. Yeah, this guy. Same. Christopher Walter. So it changed the guy. Right? It's too bad that it didn't return the whole JSON object. That's kind of stupid. So we tried everything. We tried the get, the put, the delete, and the post. We tried them all. And this is simply how you use a web API. You get to play around, actually. So that's just about it. You know, you have this whole functionality that allows you to actually easily interact with the web API. Now you have your own web API. You can actually communicate with it with a simple application that just makes an AJAX call. So that's about it. You can post students, you can pull back students. Any type that you're going to create in here is going to be serialized. Don't freak out from the generated code. It's just to handle exceptions and whatnot, so in a professional way. So, you know, you can actually write it from scratch by just going back to the previous videos where I talked about the entity frameworks and how to use that. So all it really did is just went and created a context. Don't worry about that. And what it did next is just used my model, and in the database, let's take a look at our database in here. In our database in here, it simply created, this is our previous example. Where is the example that we were just working on? I think that's the guy. Students API context. If you go and view data, that'll just show you the stuff that we were just posting. So these are all the things that we were posting right there. So that's about it. You know, I hope you enjoy your video. See you next time. Thank you.